A faint sound at the back of the hall, one pair of hands clapping. Then another. And another. The applause grew slowly, rising like a wave gathering strength, until it crashed into a full standing ovation. People stood up row by row, compelled not by excitement, but by emotion. Tears fell freely. Smiles spread without effort. Hearts felt lighter, fuller, awake. Eliandro stood in the center of it all, overwhelmed, realizing that in a single performance he had done something no one expected from a quiet Filipino singer with a borrowed guitar and a dream larger than life. He hadn't just sung a song. He had changed AGT forever. As Eliandro moved into the final lines of the song, an extraordinary quietness settled over the hall. It wasn't the ordinary pause that followed a good performance. It was something deeper, a silence that felt heavy, fragile, almost sacred. Even the air seemed to hesitate, unsure whether exhaling might break the moment. The last note rose gently from his voice, floating upward as if it could reach beyond the roof of the theater and into the night sky. It was soft, warm, and trembling with everything he had carried inside him for years. And then, like the closing of a chapter, the note faded into silence. Eliandro kept his eyes closed for a breath longer. Not out of fear, but out of gratitude. For his father. For the journey. For the courage it took to stand on that stage. He felt the quiet around him, not empty, but full of something he had never felt before, acceptance. When he finally opened his eyes, the world stood still. Simon Cowell had not moved. His hands were clasped. His expression was unreadable, frozen somewhere between shock and awe. A man known for quick judgments was suddenly speechless. It wasn't the silence of doubt, it was the silence that only comes when someone has witnessed something unforgettable. The other judges sat perfectly still, their faces softened, their eyes shining. No one dared speak first. No one wanted to be the one to break what Eliandro had created. And then it happened. The judges, usually composed and controlled, exchanged quiet glances. How could one man, standing so still, create so much emotion? How could a voice be so strong and so fragile at the same time? Every note that Eliandro released carried a story of years spent unseen, a story of love that never left, a story of a dream that refused to die even when everything else did. People weren't just listening. They were remembering. Remembering their parents. Their sacrifices. Their dreams. Their heartbreaks. Their hopes. Eliandro's voice had become a mirror, reflecting pieces of everyone who heard him. By the time he reached the middle of the song, the entire audience was wrapped in a silence so emotional, so raw, that it felt sacred. It was the kind of silence that could only come from hearts being touched all at once. And although Eliandro couldn't see their faces clearly from the stage, he could feel it. He could feel that, for the first time in his life, the world was truly listening. As Eliandro's voice moved through the hall, it carried something deeper than melody. It carried life. It carried truth. It carried a kind of emotion that didn't need language to be understood. The sound wrapped around the crowd like a quiet embrace, reaching people who didn't know him, didn't know his struggles, yet somehow felt everything he was singing. The camera swept across the audience. On one side, a mother clutched her chest, feeling memories rise, memories of people she had lost, dreams she once chased, moments she tried to bury. A single tear rolled down her cheek before she could stop it. A young boy sat beside his father, staring at the stage with wide eyes. He didn't know who Elvis was. He didn't know the history behind the music. But he knew this voice made him feel something warm, something gentle, something he had never heard before. Even the toughest faces in the crowd began to soften. Men who rarely showed emotion found themselves blinking faster, pretending the lights were too bright. Couples reached for one another's hands without speaking. Strangers leaned forward in unison, drawn by an invisible pull they didn't understand. His father had passed away years ago, leaving behind an empty chair and a silence that echoed too loud. But tonight, on this stage thousands of miles from home, that silence felt full again. It felt warm. It felt like presence. As the music wrapped around him, Eliandro felt a hand on his shoulder, not real, but real enough. A comfort only memory could give. A strength only love could leave behind. He sang not to win. Not to impress. Not to be famous. He sang because his father once believed he could. He sang because, in moments like this, he felt his father standing with him, sharing the stage, guiding the notes, lifting the weight of fear from his chest. And the audience, without knowing any of this, felt the truth inside every word. As Eliandro's voice flowed through the hall, something inside him began to shift. Beneath the bright stage lights and the silent expectations of the judges, a softer light appeared in his memory, a memory he carried everywhere, even when he tried not to. It was the memory of his father, Mario Cruz, the man who first placed a small, old radio in front of him when he was only a child. Mario didn't have much, but he had music. And through that music, he taught young Eliandro how to feel life, not just live it. He taught him that songs were not meant to impress people, but to heal them. As Eliandro continued singing, the present moment blended with pieces of his past. He could almost see his father sitting on their worn-out wooden chair back home, tapping his foot, swaying his head lightly to the rhythm. The same gentle smile. The same hopeful eyes. The same quiet encouragement that had carried him through every difficult day. There were nights when Eliandro felt like giving up, nights when dreams felt too heavy for a man with so little. And on those nights, it was always his father's voice he remembered. A reminder that talent meant nothing without heart, and heart meant everything when life got hard. The hall was alive with scattered murmurs, soft laughter, and restless movements as people settled into their seats. AGT was always loud before a performance, a mix of excitement, curiosity, and impatience. But all of that changed the moment Eliandro walked onto the stage. His quiet presence created a strange calm, as if the room sensed something different about him even before he sang a single note. The judges glanced up, expecting another regular audition. Simon Cowell, known for his sharp eyes and even sharper expectations, leaned back in his chair with a familiar look of skepticism. He had seen thousands of performers, hopeful, nervous, confident, broken, and very few ever made him pause. But the moment Eliandro lifted his head and placed his hand over the microphone, something subtle shifted in the air. The band was silent. The crowd was still finding their breath. And Eliandro, with all the softness of a man who had lived more life than he spoke about, closed his eyes and began. His first note was gentle, almost fragile, as though he was offering the world a small piece of his soul to see if they would hold it carefully. And then, slowly, the voice grew. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just honest. Deeply, painfully honest. The sound rolled across the hall like a warm wave, touching the quiet corners where people stored their forgotten dreams. Every word came from a place of truth, carrying stories of months he struggled, years he waited, and moments he almost gave up but didn't. And that was when it happened. Simon Cowell stopped moving.